This is a News 12 special presentation. Domestic violence is a silent epidemic across the city, but you don't have to suffer. There are many safe places and programs to help right here in our borough. Tonight, News 12 The Bronx and the Bronx Borough President's Office bring you Diva Talk, an open discussion about domestic violence and the resources available to victims in the Bronx. Now, from the Pergodas Theater, your host for Diva Talk, News 12's Alicia Lovenshire.
It's not really easy to talk about. It's certainly never easy to endure, but domestic violence is real. It affects women, men, children, and families from walks of all life. It knows no boundaries and affects many people regardless of their wealth, their status, their cultural heritage, their race, or their religion. Over the course of the next hour, we're going to talk about domestic violence and the resources available to you and your loved ones. You don't have to suffer in silence. There's a number on the bottom of your screen. That number is the New York City Domestic Violence Hotline. It's 1-800-621-HOPE. If you or someone you know is suffering, call that number. Counselors are standing by and are ready to give you immediate assistance over the phone. Help is available in over 150 languages. Domestic violence doesn't always affect adults. In fact, children are the hidden victims. The Domestic Violence Resource Center estimates 3 to 10 million children here in the U.S. witness domestic violence every year. Our first two panelists are all too familiar with the painful and vicious cycle of this kind of abuse. I'd like to welcome now Anita Birmingham from the Bronx and Dr. Nellie Maceda, a pediatric attending physician at Montefiore Medical Center. Ladies, thank you so much for joining us this evening and for having the courage to share your stories with us. Anita, I'd like to start with you. In your home as a child, your stepfather was your abuser. Talk to me about the relationship you had with him.
Well, it wasn't really a relationship. Starting from the age of 8 years old, I was abused by him, tied up in chairs, burnt. I was told that no man was ever gonna want me for anything but for sex. I believe that my mother should have did more to help me, but unfortunately she didn't. She came from the old era where men were right, no matter what they did, in the country. Very hard because at that age, there's supposed to be someone there to help you and be there for you. But unfortunately, I didn't get that. I wound up leaving my mother's house at the age of 14 and trying to make it on my own. I wound up in gangs and other places that I shouldn't have been at that age.
Now, you were one of 4 girls living in your home at the time, correct?
Yes.
And you were the only one being abused, is that right?
Yes, because I wasn't his child.
What do you mean by that? You weren't
I was
his
his
child.
stepdaughter. Growing up, my parents' friends used to come over, well, my stepfather's friends used to come over and tell me that he used to try to drown me in the lake when he went fishing, or because I wasn't his daughter. My 3 other sisters, they say I'm not their sister because I'm not their father's child. It's just been very hard.
When you see that you're the only one who's being abused in this situation, do you ever ask yourself, why me?
Yes, I have. To this day, I still, that little child that didn't have the voice still asks, why me? I believe I'm a very beautiful person, and I didn't deserve what I got. I had my childhood taken away. I had to grow up before my time.
What was the breakthrough for you? How did you escape this abuse?
When I turned 17, the Department of Social Services said that I was a liberated minor, and as long as I went to school, they would put me in an apartment.
Your parents would?
No, Social Service
Would put you in an apartment?
And would put me in an apartment as long as I promised to finish school. So I did that. And from there, I did some time in the military. Now I'm doing great. I'm I'm here. I've suffered, domestic violence, sexual assault, and breast cancer, and I'm still here.
Well, we're glad that you're here.
Thank you
for that. But your experience was actually very different from Dr. Maceda's. Dr. Maceda, you were witnessing the abuse in your home, correct?
Correct. I was raised by a single mother who really didn't have emotional or psychological capabilities to raise us, and was very abusive towards my two older brothers. Had a long series of boyfriends come through the house, and what happened in that case to my brother is that they unfortunately were more of what she describes, were more of the target of the abuse, probably because they were vocal and more, as boys tend to be Oedipal with their mothers, much more feelings of betrayal whenever they saw her with different men. Both committed suicide, but my younger brother, who was a year older than me and with whom I was very close, was in a 20-year relationship with a woman, married, where he beat her from the time they were boyfriend and girlfriend, and after 20 years of marriage, he shot and killed her and shot himself.
Did you ever feel guilty living
Always.
in an environment like that?
Always.
And how did you cope?
I believe that my anxiety, I channeled that energy into studying. I wanted to excel, get straight A's, and I always had a dream of just getting out of my situation. My brothers, unfortunately, went to a local public school. It was the 60s and the 70s, a lot of things that we're so aware of now we weren't back then. Basically went to a high school that didn't care whether you showed up or not. Attendance was maybe taken, at certain classes, but certainly the monitoring that we have now for children didn't exist. They eventually dropped out and entered into lives of violence. My brother, actually, the one who committed the murder-suicide, was a corrections officer. So after many years, did in fact get himself together, at least employable. And the rage, however, was always there from what he saw as a child.
How lucky do you feel to have been able to escape this and be successful and be the doctor that you are today?
I have to say that because I'm a physician, I understand a little bit more about neuroscience, the science of the brain, etc. Lucky is the operative word. I mean, I always thought I got here because of hard work. Luck had nothing to do with it. But now we know luck had so much to do with it, because it isn't only the luck of the draw, the family that you're born into that you didn't choose, but it's also, we know now, that so many determinants are genetically based, and also that the architecture of your brain is one where it's that constant push and pull of what you're genetically endowed with and what is in your environment. In pediatrics, we have a term for what my friend here just explained, and what so many, way too many of our children are living through, which is called the toxic stress syndrome. We know now through brain imaging and other kinds of neuropsychiatric testing that a toxic environment early on, day one of life, you know how we feel when we're in danger and our heart rates go up and we have stress hormones that go up, especially cortisol, that actually can change brain architecture. And the way I like to describe it to my patients from whom I'm counseling on the importance of a nurturing and warm, loving environment is that if you're always prepared for a fight, or if you're always prepared to flee, that brain is not able to learn. And so many of our children that we wonder, why is it that if you're given the tools to learn, if you're in school, why aren't you learning? Why aren't you taking? It's because the brain is re-experiencing the trauma, and because we are in what is called a hyperarousal state, where it's difficult to concentrate when you're feeling.
Let's fast forward now. Anita, talk to me about the message you have for women who may be experiencing a similar situation.
Well, I would just like, to let the women and, those men who are out there going through domestic violence too, that there is hope. There is life after domestic violence. I do catering. I do groups at Lincoln Hospital for domestic violence and sexual assault.
Talk to me about this t-shirt you're wearing.
I made this t-shirt. Can't read it right now, but yes, I made it for Domestic Violence Month because I do a table at Lincoln Hospital every year and hand out literature and let them know there is a place to go in confidence. You wouldn't have to worry about, you know, your husband or whoever it is coming there and finding out where you are or, you know, snatching you out of the group. It's things you can do. There's help out there. So just never, you know, believe that anything that happened to you was your fault, you know, or because of something you wore, you were asking for it, because that's not the, you know, it's not the answer.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening and sharing your stories with us. As they both said, there is help and resources available out there. You do not have to suffer in silence. The number to the New York City Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-621-HOPE. We'll be right back. And you're watching Diva Talk. Apart from the physical pain, we've heard of the psychological and emotional pain that a person dealing with domestic violence will experience, but they're not the only ones affected. There are compassionate people who allow themselves to be there for survivors and for victims in the form of counselors, advisors, and service workers day in and day out, who are deeply impacted by the difficult realities they help other people face in their lives. With that, I'd like to welcome Kim Cavern with Safe Horizon and Joyce Smith, the director of the Bronx Family Justice Center. Ladies, thank you so much for joining us. Kim, I'd like to start with you. Your staff and you as well, working at Safe Horizon, you hear these painful stories on a regular basis, and you say that it's possible that your staffers can experience something called vicarious trauma. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so we know that the people who come to do this work really find their own meaning for their life in doing this work. But unfortunately, domestic violence doesn't stop. And sometimes the volume of clients that we see, sometimes the often horrific stories that we're hearing can certainly have an impact on the people that are doing this work. And that can come out in a variety of ways for people. So for instance, some people may stop finding joy in their life where they used to see joy. They may look at the world through a lens that's been filtered by the horrible stories that they're hearing every day. And we know that we really have a responsibility to the clients that we see, that we're present and compassionate, and that we are respectful and ready to do this work. And so managing that, I think, is really important.
Joyce, talk to me about what resources are available from the Bronx Family Justice Center for people who may be experiencing domestic violence.
In 2010, the Mayor's Office to Combat Domestic Violence established the Family Justice Center here in the Bronx. And the intent is to provide a one-stop shop for individuals who are experiencing intimate partner violence, sex trafficking, or elder abuse, to receive services in counseling and case management and legal advice, all for free.
So Kim, for people who are working at the Justice Center, if they start to experience something like vicarious trauma, how do we start to correct that?
I think the first thing is to really recognize what those signs are. We at Safe Horizon do a lot of work around vicarious trauma, so we train our staff in what some of the symptoms look like. We as supervisors take a big responsibility in recognizing those signs in our staff and talking to staff about that. We provide regular supervision for staff so that staff have an opportunity to sit down with their supervisor and talk about how the work is impacting them. And then we do some creative things. So we do yoga days. We try to get the staff out for meetings so that we're outside in nature. But I think that the key is that it has to be really consistent and regular.
Joyce, for someone who comes to the Justice Center, they walk in through their front door, they walk to a counter, what exactly is the process? What happens?
And well, the first thing a client will experience is welcome from our warm reception staff. They'll be introduced to a screener who will assess their needs and find out what the issues are that are present in their lives. And they'll connect the client with one of our service providers. So if the client identifies a need to find housing because she's left the abusive partner, one of our case managers will be able to connect her with emergency shelter. If she needs legal advice about an immigration issue, one of our providers will be able to give her that information for free.
So you work with a lot of different organizations in the borough to try and help people who come to your center.
Absolutely.
How easy is it to coordinate with the other resources to get these people the help that they need? Is it oftentimes difficult because the cases can be so complex?
It was certainly difficult prior to the establishment of the Family Justice Center model. Prior to that, an individual who's experiencing an abusive relationship would have to find the assistance on their own, despite the frustration, despite the fear, despite the intimidation that they might be experiencing. So they would give up and they would continue to maintain these relationships, often in silence. But now having one place that that person can go to and find help, free from judgment, free from any fear that their information is going to be disclosed because the assistance is rendered in a confidential manner, they'll be able to be connected with every type of service that they need to be empowered to be safe.
Good. Kim, how can Safe Horizon also do the same for people who reach out to the organization?
So we are one of the partner agencies with the Family Justice Center, so we have staff that are located in the Family Justice Centers. All of our services additionally are free and confidential. We are located in all 5 boroughs. We're in all of the courthouses. We're the largest provider of shelter in New York City. We run that fabulous domestic violence hotline. The other thing to remember is that 311 is a really great resource if you don't remember that hotline number. So if you call 311 and identify that you're dealing with issues of domestic violence, they will be able to transfer you to the city's domestic violence hotline that can then transfer you to any of those resources in the city.
I would imagine for anyone who's reaching out to one of your organizations, confidentiality is really important to them. Talk to me about how you guys make sure to safeguard that.
Well, any client who comes to our center will explicitly decide whether or not in a consent to release form they want their information released and to whom. And without that permission, our service providers are not allowed to discuss the client's information with outside agencies as well as with our own agencies internally. So we highly respect and protect our clients' confidentiality.
I would imagine if you're dealing with a particularly complex case and a person is reticent to even come to you guys from the very beginning, and there are other organizations you would want to reach out to, how do you kind of respect the wishes of being confidential while still getting the help that somebody needs? Kim?
I think the thing that we really want to do is empower the survivors that are coming into our office. So we work at Safe Horizon with clients in a way that we call client-centered, and so we really want to make sure that we're not giving advice, we're not telling clients what to do, but that we're really educating them on their options and helping and supporting them to make the best decisions. And so we may know of resources or options that we think would be beneficial for clients, but we really want to make sure that they're coming to those decisions on their own, and we're not putting them back in a dynamic of power and control like they're experiencing with their abusive partner, but that we're letting them make their decisions. So we'll make sure to educate them on some of those great resources that we think might be available to them. And we also want to recognize that they might not be ready to reach out to those resources right now, but to know that we're going to be here the next time they call or the next time they call. And if at some point they are ready to make that call, we're going to be supportive of them when they do.
And I wanted to ask, talk to me about the different kinds of clients you guys are seeing on a regular basis. Joyce?
Approximately 85% of our clients are women. Here in the Bronx, many of our clients are speaking a language other than English at home. They may be monolingual Spanish speakers. They may have immigration issues that they're primarily concerned with, because an abuser will oftentimes hold that promise of citizenship and status in the country over an abused partner's head to maintain the abusive relationship, the power and control dynamic. So we make it a point to assess that need as soon as the client comes through the door. We do have, however, approximately 12 to 15% of our clients who are men. There is no limitation to the client who can come through our door in terms of their gender, their sexual orientation, their ability to pay, their immigration status. None of that matters as far as the Family Justice Center model is concerned.
Excellent, excellent. I'd like to now welcome the borough president who is in our audience this evening. His office, along with News 12 The Bronx, have been putting on Diva Talk for the past 10 years. And now, Borough President Ruben Diaz Jr., thank you so much for joining us. I'd just like to ask you, talk to me about why your office takes part in this mission every single year and some of the events that your office hosts relating to raising awareness for domestic violence.
Right. First of all, let me just start by thanking News 12 and all of the panelists who are here today, as well as the many people who are sitting behind me, from the community board members to other organizations who know that while there's so much to celebrate here in the Bronx, we still have to address this little dark, dirty secret that we have in domestic violence. The reason why we wear purple is to highlight the fact that we still have to educate and that we still have to address this. You know, we continue to do things out of our office, working with the Director of Health from my office, Melissa Cebollero. We've been able to, for instance, give up office space for the Justice Center. We've done Diva Spa. We did that about a week and a half ago to have individuals come to the Rotunda and sort of pamper themselves, because we know that domestic violence is about breaking someone's spirit. We know that all of the effects. For instance, when you look on an annual basis, according to the United States, the National Center for Injury Prevention and Control, the direct medical cost on domestic violence is $1.8 billion. $1.8 billion. I mean, think about if we can sort of shave that down and use some of that money for other areas like education, like having more police officers on the street. And that's just for the direct medical costs. When we had our health summit back in April, we wanted to see what are some of the other effects of domestic violence. And we realized that there are long-term effects, like what we saw with Miss Anita Birmingham, who was here earlier on the program. The fact that things happened so many years ago, but yet many women in particular have early or unwanted pregnancies. Many people are homeless. Many of our children are homeless. There's substance abuse. There's alcohol abuse. There's mental sickness that occurs as a result of domestic violence. So these are the things that as government we need to address. And I will continue, as long as I'm the borough president, to continue to highlight this, and I will continue to work with all of the organizations and just let the victims here in the Bronx, at least in the Bronx, know that we're with you. We have your back. We're going to make sure that we eradicate this as best that we can here in our borough and throughout the city of New York.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Ladies, I want to switch it back over to you and ask you quickly, after somebody comes to your center, they've gotten the information, they've spoken to maybe a counselor, and they go back home, what's the follow-up process? What happens after that? Kim?
It can be many things. I think it's important to remember that not all of the survivors that are coming into our office are coming with the intention of leaving at that point. Leaving an abusive partner is a very dangerous time for a survivor. The one thing that we really want to do is make sure that every time a client leaves any of our offices, they're leaving with a safety plan that's been personalized for them, that they know where the help is, and they know what the next steps are going to be for them. And that may be choosing to stay in their abusive relationship, but that they want to be safer in their home. That might be that they're ready to leave and go into a shelter. It could look many different ways, but we want to make sure that every time they get off the phone, they leave, they're leaving with a safety plan.
The safety plan that they create, tell me some of the factors that go into creating that.
It could be many things. It could be filing for an order of protection. It could be calling the police, sort of the general things that we always think about. But I think that those aren't always the safest options for survivors. And so we want to look at social support. We want to make sure that, you know, if survivors are dealing with their domestic violence in ways that may not be healthy for them, that we're addressing that so that they have a safe place to go. It could be making sure that their children are involved in the safety plan so that their children know what to do if an abusive incident is happening. They know where a safe place is to go, you know, keeping copies of important documents, things like that. But we know that clients are the best experts on their own safety, and so I'm not the one who can tell you what can keep you safe. I'm going to engage and get a good sense of the history, what's worked for you, what's happened, and we'll work together to put together a safety plan that's really going to work.
Thank you both, ladies. As Joyce and Kim mentioned, there are trained people out there ready and willing to help if you're dealing with domestic violence. Again, that number is at the bottom of your screen. It's 1-800-621-HOPE. We'll be back after this break.
The News12.com Weather Center is now in your control. The all-new Weather Center has a completely interactive map with up-to-the-minute radar tracking, temperatures, wind speeds, and more. Save your location for a quick look at the weather in your neighborhood and anywhere else you want to be. Plus, your latest hyper-local video forecast is always available.
Notice these line of showers that arrived by later this morning, right around the noon hour.
The News12.com Weather Center, always in your control, online and on the go. The best place for your local news just got even better. The new News12.com gets the news to you fast and in depth, with expanded access to every story, plus personalized traffic and weather sections. Save your location for a quick check of your roads and your forecast. And your local News 12 is always streaming live.
Bronx police are on the hunt for 2 bank robbery suspects.
Check out the new News12.com. That's as local news gets. Fall means fun, apple picking, pumpkin patches, and haunted houses.
Always looking for new residents.
The Bronx Traveler on News12.com is your guide for all the best places to go. Before you plan your weekend, log on, click on the travel section, and select Day Tripper. You'll get the best neighborhood activities and haunts. It's all on News12.com, as local news gets.
We are Throgs Neck,
Fordham,
Riverdale,
Castle Hill. We are the Grand Concourse.
We are Hunts Point.
We are Arthur Avenue.
And everywhere in between.
We are your News 12.
And we are here for you with your
local news.
Because if it happens here,
You'll see it here.
On News 12, The Bronx.
We are as local news gets.
Welcome back to Diva Talk. I'm Alicia Laventure. Diva Talk is a forum aimed at ending the epidemic of domestic violence here in the Bronx. Last year, 22 people were killed in family-related domestic violence situations, the highest of all 5 boroughs in New York City. At the bottom of your screen is the number to the New York City Domestic Violence Hotline. That number, again, is 1-800-621-HOPE. Counselors are standing by around the clock to help you find the strength you need to get the support to get out of an abusive situation. You've heard some very personal stories from our panelists, as well as some resources available to people to help them get out of an abusive relationship. Now we turn to people on the front lines, recognizing people who may be suffering in silence, vital forces who help people get the strength they need and that recognize the reality that they need to change their life and get some help. With that, I turn now to our panel. I'd like to introduce Alexandra Smith, who works with Bronx Lebanon Hospital, Lenora Ware, who also works with Lincoln Medical Center, and Jennifer Warner, a licensed clinical social worker and psychotherapist who also works at Lincoln Medical Center. Ladies, thank you so much for joining us. Alexandra, I'd like to start with you. You work with residents and attendings at Bronx Lebanon Hospital to help them to recognize that someone, a patient who comes into the hospital, may be dealing with domestic violence. How do you prepare the doctors to deal with that kind of situation?
In the Department of Pediatrics, we've developed a program called AIR, Ask, Identify, and Refer. And we know that doctors are very busy and they have a lot on their plate and they have a very short period of time. So we wanted to make sure that the doctors had all the facts necessary at their fingertips. So what we've done is we have a training program where we outline what some of the risk factors are, how to ask gentle questions. We don't want people to be judged. We want them to feel safe. We also work with a lot of adolescents, and we know adolescents sometimes have a hard time opening up. So what we do is we train them to be empathetic, but also to ask the right questions. And then we've embedded in our electronic medical records an actual referral. So what they do is, if they have identified it, we either refer it directly to a social worker or to the Family Justice Center, or the number you've heard all tonight, which is 1-800-621-HOPE, because the doctors need to have that at their fingertips.
What are some of the questions the doctors would be asking and the responses that they would be getting that would cue them to fill out that sort of electronic form to get some help for the patient?
Well, sometimes they'll ask a general question like, how's everything at home?
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel safe? How is school? You know, sometimes we see bullying at the same time around with teen dating violence. So how is school? You know, or how are your friends? If we see that they've become more isolated, those are some signs, the warning signs. Also, teen pregnancy. We know that unintended teen pregnancy can also be a trigger for sexual coercion, and so these are we train with the doctors in how to recognize not just the overt signs, but they actually screen universally, because we know that some people don't have these manifest signs. So they just ask gentle probing questions.
Ladora, talk to me about some of the safety nets in place at Lincoln Medical Center to also help catch patients who may be dealing with domestic violence.
Thank you. We have a similar program. I think back in 1996 is when we started to really realize that patients are coming in and they're leaving with injuries, coming back, maybe re-injured. So we started to put a domestic violence program in place, and subsequent to that, we came up with a protocol, which is also screening, that every patient, male and female, from the age of 16 up, are asked about domestic violence. But we quickly emphasize that it's important how that question is asked, similar to what Alexandra, has said, is that it's important for a person to understand. With our population, not everybody understands domestic violence as a concept. Not everybody understands abuse. So we look for ways that we can find out something more generic, gentle, probing. How are things? Is anyone hurting you? Are you afraid ever at home? Are you afraid to go home? Things of that nature. And we find that if we ask direct questions, you're more likely to get a response if they are in fact in a domestic violence situation.
Now, what happens if the abuser is also in the room with the patient, the person who may be the victim of domestic violence? How would a doctor then recognize when the answers may not be so truthful?
Well, you know, we do a lot of training as well. And one of the things that we say, first of all, try never to have a patient, anybody else in the room. But if there is somebody else in the room, there are some signs that can be sort of obvious, like if this patient is checking back all the time. Patient is looking to see if it's okay to answer a question, or if that partner actually answers for her. Those are indications that we should be concerned and explore further what really is going on. There's a lot of nervous, anxious mannerisms. Any of those could occur that would give us some indication.
And I would imagine even the story that brought the person to the hospital in the first place is kind of examined by the physician,
yes,
right?
because very often, let's say there is an injury, and the patient gives us one explanation of that injury, and the doctor's looking at it, we're all looking at it and saying that could not have happened that way. So very often, the explanation is inconsistent with what we're looking at.
Gotcha. Jennifer, you as a psychotherapist, you deal with a lot of patients, and I believe a large amount of the patients you work with have actually had an earlier, maybe childhood experience with domestic violence. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Talk to me about that.
Many of the clients that we see, the survivors that we see, have a long, long history of complex trauma, of abuse throughout their life, either multiple instances of domestic violence or certainly childhood abuse.
And at what point would you become a part of this system here?
Well, we see adult survivors. So, you know, we may get somebody referred to us who's a survivor of domestic violence, but in the intake process, we'll find out that they are also a survivor of childhood abuse.
Now, even though they may not be with the abuser anymore, there's still a trauma that this survivor is dealing with, and I believe you refer to it as post-traumatic stress disorder?
Yes,
Talk
absolutely.
To me about that.
Most people think that post-traumatic stress disorder is something that only war veterans have. But a trauma is anything that has left one feeling terrified, powerless, out of control, and that their life or the life of somebody else is in danger. And certainly domestic violence meets that criteria.
And so how do you work with your patients to help them beat the PSTD?
PTSD, well, it can be a lengthy process, but it's certainly about normalizing it for them, what's going on for them. Often I'll say to my clients, how you are feeling is normal, but what happened to you is not normal. Because so often they've either been told that they're crazy, that how they feel is, they're sick, there's something wrong with them. But in fact, how they're feeling is entirely consistent with the horrors that they've experienced.
Alexandra, are there any trends with the people who are reporting domestic violence or who may be admitting to it if and when they end up in the hospital?
I don't know if there are specific trends. Something that caught my attention about a year and a half ago was traumatic brain injury. And very much in keeping with the post-traumatic stress disorder, sometimes what happens is we think it's PTSD, but it's really masking what we call TBI, traumatic brain injury, because the majority of injuries that happen to people are from the neck up. And it usually is blunt force trauma over a lengthy period of time. So we have to be vigilant. Some of these things mask as something else. And that is, there was a study out from Kaiser Permanente in conjunction with the Centers for Disease Control called the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experience Study. And what they did was, they're an HMO, and so they sent out questionnaires to all of their people. They got over 17,000 responses in their questionnaires. And what they did was they talked about what happened in your childhood. And one specific question caught my eye, especially for tonight, and I wanted to read it in light of talking about domestic violences. Was your mother or stepmother often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at her, or sometimes often or very often kicked, bitten, hit with a fist, or hit with something hard, ever repeatedly hit, at least a few minutes, or threatened with a gun or knife? Now, these are questions that are being asked to adults. And the shocking results, and these, again, I want to make sure that I get this correct. There's several different categories, and people who answered 4 or more categories of childhood exposure did 4 to 12-fold increased health risks for alcoholism, drug abuse, depression, and suicide, and a 2 to 4-fold increase in smoking, poor self-related health, and over 50 sexual intercourse partners in a lifetime, and an increase in sexually transmitted diseases. And then this is what was the most horrifying. With an ACE score, an adverse childhood experience score of 6 or higher, there's an almost 20-year shortening of lifespan. Wow. Now, I think that's very deep. So if we're not catching this when people come in to see you, or with our pediatricians and our obstetrics and gynecology department, if we're not catching this early, these people have a trajectory unlike those people who don't have this.
Jennifer, how would you help someone who's experienced this in the past sort of stay present in their current situation?
Well, Lisa, I just wanted to add to that too. What's interesting about this question that Alexandra was just mentioning was that we often think that domestic violence is just physical violence, but there's an enormous emotional violence component to this. There's a sexual violence component to it. Many people don't realize that you can be raped and be married, that there's marital rape. So when questions are asked such as, have you seen somebody being hit or beaten, or that's kind of obvious. But what about the minimizing, the blaming, the threatening? That has just as much of a toll, certainly on children, on adolescents, and on adults. It's a consistent breakdown of self-esteem. So I just wanted to add that because it's something that people often forget. And to answer your question about one of the ways that I would help a client who's been through this is a technique called grounding. It's different than relaxation or stress management. Grounding is very, very active. It brings you back to the present. Often with trauma, especially with post-traumatic stress disorder, our tendency is to go forward and project into the future. What should I do? Worrying about the future. Or to go backwards in time, to remember the traumatic events. Grounding keeps us present, keeps us in the moment where we are safe. So I will ask a client who may be suddenly having a flashback or beginning to dissociate. I'll ask them to open their eyes, look at me, scan the room. What do you hear? What does your chair feel like? What does the floor feel like beneath your feet? Listen to my voice. Describe, using your 5 senses, what's going on for you. It brings the person back to the present moment again, which helps them to feel safe and connected, because this is the moment that they can control.
Well, Dora, I would imagine in the patient room, doctors in a way kind of take on this role a little bit of psychotherapists and trying to observe and see, you know, the warning signs of someone who may be dealing with abuse. Talk to me about how important it is for those doctors to be prepared not only in their own specialty, but even doctors, nurses, other medical professionals to be able to spot these warning signs.
That's why we put a lot of emphasis on training, and every new employee gets an orientation. The moment they're hired, they get an orientation and then an annual one. And we talk a lot with the doctors because doctors are very busy. Mm-hmm. And we don't want that to be a barrier. It doesn't have to be a long explanation or examination or evaluation. 2 or 3 minutes, we tell them. Asking the right questions, observing the behaviors would help you to determine what you're looking at, whether or not abuse might be. Are there any signs there?
Ladies, thank you so much for joining us this evening. If you or someone you know is dealing with domestic violence, help is out there. The New York City Domestic Violence Hotline is one way you can get help. Again, that number is 1-800-621-HOPE. We'll be right back. Thank you very much. For many people, escaping an abuser is only the beginning of a long road to recovery. For those lucky enough to escape their abuser, trying to bring back a sense of normalcy to their life can be a daily struggle. Learning to cope with a painful past and then gaining and maintaining a positive outlook on life can be the greatest challenge a survivor faces. I'm joined now by 3 people who help those survivors bring back that sense of normalcy, who have suffered the pains of abuse and channel their energy to physical and spiritual strength. I'd like to introduce now Jade Laser, who is a yoga instructor, and Linda Ramsey Ranson and Stephanie Pryor, who are self-defense instructors. Right, okay. So I'll start with Linda and Stephanie. You both are self-defense instructors. Talk to me about some of the techniques that you will teach to people who have experienced domestic violence.
Well, first of all, you know, the self-defense aspect of our organization, which is the Women's Empowerment Self-Defense Academy, is not necessarily the self-defense aspect, the physical aspect. We focus on empowerment, prevention, and then self-defense. We truly believe that if we're not able to empower you, there's no way that you're going to be able to be successful in doing any self-defense.
How do you go about empowering
your students?
Well,
it's about making and giving the women some options and choices, number one. And then the most important thing is about self-awareness. If we can get them to recognize who they are, that they are somebody, they're not just anybody to be used or abused. And self-awareness, we believe, consists of 4 elements. That's self-respect, self-confidence, self-esteem, and self-worth. They don't work independently because there's no way that someone can say, well, you know, I'm okay, it's just that my self-esteem is low. Well, if your self-esteem is low, you're not thinking very much of yourself for your self-value, self-worth. It doesn't allow you to get up and have the confidence to move forward. And all of these elements are important to empowerment. So that is the very first excuse me, aspect that we focus on when we have women come to our workshops and our seminars. We need to build them up. We need to make them see that they are worth more than anything else. And they can't take care of anyone unless they can take care of themselves first. And then the next aspect is prevention. We give them the tools, the skills, and the techniques that are necessary to keep them safe. If they can recognize it, then they can assess it. If they can assess it, they can avoid it. And if they can avoid it, they can prevent it. And if it comes when all else has failed, all options and choices, all strategies have failed, then now they have two choices, which either is to flight or fight. And then that's when the actual physical self-defense will come into play. When someone has been confronted in physical violence, they need to know how to protect themselves.
Stephanie, what has been the experience from some of your students or clients with domestic violence? When they're coming to you guys to learn these techniques, what have they been through?
Well, we get women who have been through a lot of different types of domestic violence. As was said earlier, it has not all been physical. You have people who have been in situations for 20 years and finally break out, and it's been more of a verbal, a demeaning kind of thing, always being put down, not necessarily being beat up. We've had people come in who, yes, they have undergone a lot of physical domestic violence. One thing that's common is when they come to us, if they are still in the situation, you recognize a loss. It's like an empty soul. I don't know how else to describe that. A blankness, because they're in the situation. And lots of times they have no voice. They're not able to come out and tell you, this is what I'm feeling. They can tell you what's going on. This is happening to me, but they really can't come out and really express, this is how I feel.
How often are your students actually still in the abusive environment?
Well, we have people come in all the time that are in the situation, that are coming to seek help. I need help. What can I do? And at first they don't even want to tell you what is really going on. And you have to make people feel at ease that, you're not sitting in judgment of what's going on with them, and why are you still there? What are you doing? No, you sit there, you talk, you let them talk, ask them simple questions around things. Well, how is this happening? How is your day? What is your daily routine like? What's going on in the house? Do you get out? You kind of get a feel for the people that come in, and they start talking. In our groups, we get people that may sit back and not talk at all. And after a while, because we do some different techniques in our groups that get people involved, where you're not thinking about yourself, so to speak. You're thinking about a scenario that's presented, and you get involved and you start talking about, I wouldn't do this, or I would do, and next thing you have a camaraderie with a group of other women that have either been there or simply there trying to not ever be there. And you're all expressing your opinions, and it's back and forth, and it's a unity, which then starts to bring out everything else, because you're comfortable now. And you're around people who are not sitting there looking at you like, they're sitting there looking at you like, oh yeah, I know that feeling.
I want to go to you, Jade, now. Talk to me about how yoga can help a survivor of domestic violence bring their spiritual health to light and improve it even.
Absolutely. As a victim of domestic violence myself, I've also come to terms that it's a vicious cycle and a pattern. It's a genetic predisposition. Also, you have to be aware, as this young lady was saying, it's about your surroundings. It's no longer socioeconomics. I mean, you have people from all walks of life experiencing these kind of things. And a lot of times they go silent, and, unfortunately, many women lose their lives because they continue to stay in these kind of relationships. So, speaking from my experience in domestic violence, of course, it was very difficult. It was in a situation where the abuser just basically took control of my whole life. I was isolated from my friends, from my family, and I had to figure out a way where it was kind of like a fight or flight response. And I kind of developed a stillness in the mind, and that's where mindfulness comes in. If you find yourself in a situation like that, you have to look for red flag signs, which are very important. And unfortunately for me, it was a little too late to realize that. So I decided to, being a practitioner for 10 years of yoga, I decided to go into the teacher training so that way I can heal myself and possibly share that and do charity donations and participate with other groups that are interested in healing themselves.
What are some of the actual techniques you use in your yoga class, not only for survivors, but also even maybe counselors or service workers who work in this field who are coming for that sense of Zen?
Absolutely. A lot of it has to do with breathing, because we all know we can survive for days without food, without water, but we can only survive a few minutes without air, without the breath, oxygen. So once you control your breath, your mind stops the ruminating. Because when you're a victim of domestic violence or any kind of abuse, you develop symptoms of guilt, shame, and once you get into that mode of kind of stilling your mind with your breath, and that's when you start connecting your mind with your body.
Linda Stephanie, I'm curious, talk to me about how being prepared when you're teaching and the students are learning these self-defense techniques, how that sense of preparation and feeling confident can actually help those survivors and actually people who maybe still be dealing with domestic violence.
Well, I think that what we've focused on, by the time that we've gotten to the physical aspect of it, these women have truly found oneself. Because the way that we set up our program, you can come there, we've seen women come there that really don't even speak English. And they'll be in the class and somehow we'll be able to get across to them. And they'll come in there and they'll sit there and they won't say anything. But somehow we'll get through to them and you'll start to see the tears coming out. And then they'll start to come out. And then they'll start to talk. That means that we've gotten through for them to understand it's about self. Take care of yourself first. Love yourself first. That is the most important part of empowering any woman. Because she's got to know that she's worth something. And so we play a lot of roles, different ways to get them to loosen up. And more importantly, letting them know that this is a safe space. What is said here stays here. This is among other women that, believe me, all of it starts to creep out, that everybody's able to recognize what's going on.
I only have a minute left. Stephanie, tell me, what's your final message to women who are either suffering or are survivors of domestic violence?
Well, my final message is it's time. It's time to fight back. And when I say that, I don't mean necessarily physically, but first within and then without. Because we talk a lot, and talk is not saving our lives, so to speak. It's time. Women are some of the strongest people in the world, and we need to stand up and fight back. There's no reason for us to be abused. We are too great.
Jay, do you have something you want to add? Ladies, thank you so much for joining us this evening. The damaging effects of domestic violence are far-reaching. The abuse creates a wave that affects not only the people in the home, but loved ones outside of the home, and even counselors on the other end of a hotline. But you don't have to suffer in silence. Help is out there. Resources are out there. I'd like to thank our survivors who shared their very personal stories with us this evening. I'd also like to thank the other panelists who combat domestic violence with the work that they do every single day. I'd like to thank Pagodas Theater for hosting us, and on behalf of News 12 The Bronx and the Bronx Borough President's Office, thank you for watching.